Greetings, grammarians, and welcome to the fourth video of Grammar Cats with Gordon. In this session, we will explore ways that the sentence patterns we looked at previously can be expanded by adding adverbial elements. Like the other videos in this series, each one builds on the previous one, so if you haven't already, I would recommend that you watch the previous videos before continuing. Also, like the other tutorials, we'll be using the phrase structure rules from the grammar book by Diane Larson Freeman and Marion Salsi Murcia. You can see the full reference at the bottom of the screen. And as with the previous video, I'll be using my cats, Hamish and Ruby, as inspiration for example sentences to illustrate the various phrase structure rules. So let's get started. So what are adverbials? Well, the adverbial in English collects together many diverse language features, but mainly it functions to modify verbs, adjectives, or sentences in some way. And in doing so, it contributes various meanings to them. Adverbials are not to be confused with adverbs. As you can see here, adverbs, or more specifically, adverb phrases, are just one type of adverbial. In the example here, he eats pizza joyfully. The joyfully is an adverb, and the he, well, that's me. I do love pizza. Another type of adverbial is the prepositional phrase, illustrated here with in the morning. I try not to make a habit out of this. Also, there is the adverb clause, which consists of at least the minimal constituents of a sentence, a subject and a verb, together with an adverbial subordinator like before, after, or although. The final group is characterized not so much by its unique features as an adverbial construction, but by its location in the sentence. Sentence modifying adverbials are fronted at the beginning of sentences, and their scope covers the whole sentence, not just the verb phrase. And as you can see, all of the three adverbial types listed here can potentially perform the role of sentence modifiers. So for our objectives for this tutorial, by the end of it, you should be able to diagram all of the following adverbial elements: prepositional phrases, adverb phrases, adverb clauses, and sentence modifiers. So let's begin with prepositional phrases. You'll recall we already discussed prepositional phrases in the previous video. And you may remember this sentence: I gave cake to them, with the prepositional phrase to them. I also mentioned that the verb give here is a ditransitive verb, or a verb that takes two objects. And therefore, the prepositional phrase is an obligatory element of the verb phrase. And as such, it actually constitutes a distinct sentence pattern, SVOP. However, with the phrase structure rules we are using here, prepositional phrases that are generated from adverbials rather than verb phrases are not obligatory sentence elements. By way of example, let's look at the following sentence. Ruby ate her dinner. Well, actually, she only ate half her dinner, but let's keep it simple. This is a perfectly well-formed SVO sentence. It does not require any additional prepositional phrase to complete it, and it can be diagrammed as follows. But let's say we wanted more detail and say she ate her dinner on the floor. Notice I have kept the period here to emphasize that the prepositional phrase on the floor is not required to complete the sentence. In our diagram, then, we will generate an adverbial from the predicate. We will then specify the type of adverbial, which in this case is a prepositional phrase. And we will use the same rules we employed previously for expanding the prepositional phrase to diagram the rest of our sentence. Now let's compare our two sentences On the left, in our SVOP sentence pattern, you'll notice that the prepositional phrase is generated directly from the verb phrase because it's required to complete the argument of the verb. However, in the SVO sentence on the right, there is the additional non-obligatory prepositional phrase. As you can see, the prepositional phrase is not bound directly to the verb phrase. It is integrated more loosely into the sentence from the adverbial, which comes from the more general syntactic unit, the predicate. As we'll see, English syntax is quite flexible when it comes to the placement of adverbials. For example, if we return to our sentence, Ruby ate her dinner on the floor, there are few constraints on the use of adverbials. We can add in the living room, again, generated from the predicate. We can add another prepositional phrase specifying the time at 6 o'clock. And so you can see syntactically there are far fewer restrictions on the use of adverbials than other sentence constituents we have looked at up to now. So turning now to the adverb phrase, this is an especially common type of adverbial, which includes adverbs of direction, location, manner, time, and frequency. So our example sentence is, Ruby loves Hamish very much, which is pretty apparent in the photo, though not sure if Hamish is reciprocating the feeling here. To diagram this sentence, we have our simple SVO pattern, and we will first generate our adverbial from the predicate. But this time, rather than a prepositional phrase, we have an adverbial phrase. In this case, we have not one, but two adverbs, which very, which is an intensifier, and much, which we can account for simply by expanding the node to include multiple adverbs, like this. All right, so far so good. Moving on to the adverb clauses. We will require Ruby's assistance again for creating an example sentence. And you can see she has just finished dinner and is now practicing her DJing. So we have the sentence, Ruby spun records after she had her dinner. And we will start by diagramming the main clause of the sentence, a simple SVO construction, Ruby spun records. To account for the subordinate clause, after she had her dinner, we will, as with all the other sentences here, expand the predicate to generate an adverbial. And the type of adverbial at stake here is, of course, an adverbial clause. As you can see, the word after here is not a preposition because it's followed by a phrase, because it's followed by a full clause rather than a phrase. This is commonly referred to in most grammars as a subordinating conjunction, but in our phrase structure rules, it's called an adverbial subordinator, which we will abbreviate rather inartfully as adv sub. So now that we have accounted for the word after, what construction remains? Well, the answer is another sentence. She had her dinner, which we can just abbreviate as S, and use the same phrase structure rules we've used throughout these videos to account for its constituents, including, of course, a subject and a predicate. All right, so turning now to sentence modifiers. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, sentence modifiers are simply sentence initial adverbials whose scope is the whole sentence, not just the verb phrase. Let's look at our example sentence, which you might be happy to read. Fortunately, we will be done soon. Here, the adverb fortunately modifies the whole sentence, not just the verb phrase. So when diagramming the sentence, we start with our sentence and its sentence modifier, abbreviated as SM. We then proceed in the same way we have up to now by identifying it as an adverbial, and in this case as an adverbial phrase, to generate the adverbial fortunately. So once we have accounted for this, what's left? Well, again, a sentence. And employing the same rules we have up to now, we can produce this tree diagram. So what happens then if we have a prepositional phrase rather than an adverb phrase in sentence initial position? Like this one, in no time, we will be done. Well, we follow the same procedure. To map the sentence, in no time, we will be done, we start with a sentence and a sentence modifier. But instead of an ADVP, adverbial phrase, we generate a prepositional phrase. And we produce in no time. And then expanding the S, expanding the S, we can account for the remainder of the sentence. We will be done. So how about an adverbial clause in sentence initial position? As you may have guessed, the same pattern holds. In the sentence, before you know it, will be done, and I really mean it this time, there is an S followed by an SM to account for the clause before you know it, which from which we elaborate the adverbial clause to produce a sentence. We then move on to develop the subordinating sentence or clause as follows. All right, so thank you for watching, and thank you to Hamish and Ruby for the sentences. Now on to the practice exercises. Here are the trees to diagram. Please pause your video here. And here are the answers. Thank you for watching.